If you've ever played the original Mega Man, you probably know that it is a hard game. Between the difficult platforming stages and bosses, the game has quite a reputation for being a nightmare for casual players, with many of them never actually reaching the end of the game, which is a shame knowing how satisfying it is to get that final hit on Dr. Wily. So I've decided to put together a complete walkthrough on the game, detailing the order in which it should be completed, as well as some tips and strategies on how to progress through it easier. Before I get into breaking down the game in its entirety, there are a few pieces of important information that will make your time with Mega Man much easier than if you were to go into it blind. First of all, let's go over the different weapons that you can use within Mega Man. By pressing the start button on your controller, you can bring up the weapons menu and select from any of the weapons you have unlocked up until that point, each being denoted by a single letter. In total, there are 7 unique weapons and 1 utility that are collected across your playthrough. One of these you always have, with the rest being granted to you upon the completion of each of the game's stages, all except for the utility, which I'll touch on in a second. Firstly, your starter weapon is known as the Mega Buster, and is notated as P in the menu. The Mega Buster is a fairly standard weapon that shoots out small yellow projectiles known as solar bullets in whatever direction the player is facing. There's really nothing too special about this weapon, save for its unlimited ammo and ability to be rapidly fired by mashing the B button, dealing high damage in a short period of time. Next up, represented by G in the menu, is the Super Arm. This weapon is obtained by beating Guts Man, and is capable of picking up certain grabbable objects throughout the game, such as blocks or boulders. These objects can then be thrown by the player to deal massive damage to specific enemies and bosses. The Super Arm can be quite useful in these certain circumstances, but really doesn't find much use outside of such. Moving on, we have the Rolling Cutter, which is labeled as C in the menu. The Rolling Cutter is unlocked by being Cutman stage and fires a spinning blade in an arc-like motion. It can be useful for clearing certain enemies out of your way before traversing the platforms above you, or taking down Elec Man. The Rolling Cutter can also serve pretty well as a backup weapon for some of the later bosses in the game. Following the Rolling Cutter is the Thunder Beam, obtained by defeating Elec Man and denoted by E in the menu. The Thunder Beam is one of the most versatile weapons in the game, firing out 3 electric bolts tridirectionally and dealing high damage to many enemies and bosses. The Thunder Beam is also capable of destroying blocks and boulders, with the shrapnel from such going on to inflict additional damage to the surrounding enemies. Next up is the Ice Slasher, represented by I in the menu and obtained by completing Iceman stage. The Ice Slasher doesn't deal any damage itself, except against Fireman, but it can be quite useful in freezing certain enemies or obstacles as to bypass having to deal with them. It can also be used in tandem with other weapons to keep difficult enemies such as Big Eyes frozen while you take them out. Moving on, we have the Firestorm, unlocked by beating Fireman and notated with F in the menu. The Firestorm shoots out a single fireball projectile while simultaneously surrounding the player in a shield of fire, which can be useful for keeping certain bosses at bay and outputting fairly decent damage. The last of the weapons is the Hyper Bomb, denoted by B in the menu and obtained by defeating Bomb Man. In my opinion, the Hyper Bomb is the most useless of all the weapons, as it takes an incredibly long time to explode, but some people find it to be effective in taking on Guts Man. Finally, there is a utility that can be collected in Elec Man stage known as the Magnet Beam, represented by M in the menu. The Magnet Beam creates platforms from your position, whose lengths vary based on how long the B button is pressed. The Magnet Beam is incredibly useful throughout Mega Man, and can be used to traverse over large gaps, bypass certain sections, and make your experience much better overall. The Magnet Beam can either be released before you jump, placing it at a low height and is useful for crossing long gaps, or during your jump, placing it higher up and giving you the ability to reach high areas. It can be somewhat difficult to become good at using the Magnet Beam, but once you do, it'll take you to new heights, literally. It's important to note that there is a system of weapon effectiveness within the game in which certain weapons are effective against certain bosses. The system is basically just a drawn-out version of rock, paper, scissors, and an abridged explanation of it is as follows. The Super Arm is effective against Cutman, the Rolling Cutter against Elec Man, the Thunder Beam against Iceman, the Ice Slasher against Fireman, the Firestorm against Bomb Man, and the Hyper Bomb against Guts Man. This weapon effectiveness system also applies to some enemies and the Wily stage bosses, but I'll leave that to whenever those come up. Additionally, there are a few different pickups that appear throughout the game that should be pointed out. Firstly is the bonus ball that randomly drops from enemies and simply serves to increase your score. Next, there are the health and energy pickups that appear in certain sections of the stages throughout Mega Man, and have a small chance to drop from enemies as well. Both the health and energy drops each have a small and large variant. with the small one recovering a little bit of your health or energy, and the large one recovering a lot of such. Lastly, there are the 1-up, which is found throughout certain stages of the game and has a very small chance of being dropped for enemies, and the Yashichi, only appearing once in the final stage of the game and restoring all of your health and energy. One last thing I should touch on before getting into the walkthrough is the concept of game over, and what exactly such entails. Now obviously, gaming over is a pretty common idea and occurs when you run out of lives, which in the case of Mega Man you start with 3. But what I really want to mention here is how the game punishes you for a game over. Mega Man actually has quite a forgiving game over system for an NES title. As where many other games of the time send you back to the very beginning of the game after too many game overs, Mega Man allows infinite continues, with game overs merely sending you back to the beginning of the stage that you're on, and additionally give you the option to select another stage upon game overing, providing for a fairly low degree of punishment in terms of dying throughout the game. Now with all of that covered, let's dive into how you can go about conquering Mega Man. Just a quick editor's note, I was planning on having game audio with commentary over it. However, when I listened to the game audio, it sounded really scratchy and corrupted, so instead I'm just going to have some of the music from the various Mega Man games underneath the commentary. But yeah, that's about it. Now back to the video. When you first start the game, you're presented with 6 different levels that you can play in any order: Cutman, Gutsman, Iceman, Bombman, Fireman, and Elec Man. While you could technically play them in whatever order you please, it's important to consider the game's weapon effectiveness system, as it essentially forms a boss order that you can follow. Generally, you want to start out with either Gutsman or Bombman, as both of these bosses can be taken down relatively easily with your base weapon, and then from there on you can simply follow the weapon effectiveness cycle to easily beat the bosses throughout the game. I personally prefer to start with Gutsman, as doing so allows you to have access to the Magnet Beam and Firestorm by the time that you get to Bombman, making his stage much easier. But if you have trouble beating Gutsman with the Mega Buster, which is your base weapon, you might want to go for Bombman first, as it only takes 3 shots from the Hyper Bomb to take out Gutsman. When you first spawn into Gutsman's stage, there are 3 enemies to contend with that pop up and shoot at you when you get close to them. If you jump and quickly fire your Mega Buster, then these guys can be taken out before they get a chance to attack you. However, this can be a difficult strategy to pull off, and if you do fail to hit them in time, you can go down to the section below them to avoid their shots. After that, we get to a section where you have to cross a gap aboard a moving platform. My recommendation for this is to try and keep your jumps high, while minimizing the amount of jumps you need to perform as best as you can. It's very easy to fall off at each of the gaps in the rail, but this can be avoided by doing a high jump a little bit before each gap. Once you've cleared the moving platform, you'll come to an area of solid ground with 3 enemies that swoop in to hit you. To dodge these guys, you should attempt to jump before you're below them, as they lock onto your Y position, and if you're in mid-air when this occurs, they will lock onto a higher Y position, and thus after you fall, they attack a space that's above you rather than where you are. You do want to shoot the lowest of the 3 with your Mega Buster, however, as it's kind of difficult to dodge it just by jumping. If you do end up taking a bit of damage, however, there's a health pickup that you can get immediately after this section. Next we come across these notoriously annoying enemies that throw their pickaxes at you. How I recommend taking these guys out is by stopping whenever they've jumped on the screen, and to start mashing the B button to rapidly fire your buster. When they throw one of their pickaxes at you, you want to move forward just enough to where it won't hit you. With correct movement and fast enough mashing, you should be able to take these guys down without getting hit. Now you can essentially just fall down this next section here. There's a few health and energy pickups that you can pick up along the way if you do need them, but overall this part's relatively straightforward. Next we come across this large robot enemy known as a Big Eye. If it does 2 low jumps, you can run and jump over him, and if he does 2 high jumps, you can run under him. But if he does a low jump, then a high jump, or a high jump, then a low jump, chances are you're just going to have to tank through the damage. After that, you enter the hallway before Gutsman himself, and here you have 4 more of the enemies that we saw previously at the beginning of the stage. You'll want to shoot these guys a little bit before they open up, so they won't shoot at you like they did here on the last one for me. And if necessary, you can go back and forth to farm them for a little bit of health. The Gutsman fight itself can be a little difficult, as Gutsman stuns you if you're on the ground whenever he lands his jump, and it's very easy to get locked in his stun cycle. To avoid this, you'll want to do a high jump right before Gutsman hits the ground, and as long as you just keep firing at him with your Mega Buster and dodging out of the way, you'll eventually take him down. Although if you do find this fight to be too difficult, you can always attempt Bombman stage first to get the Hyper Bomb, as that weapon only takes 3 shots to take out Gutsman. After Gutsman, we enter into Cutman stage, as the Super Arm, the weapon we got from beating Gutsman, is effective against Cutman, only taking 2 hits to beat him. For these guys at the beginning of the stage, I recommend shooting the 2 that are on Mega Man's eye level and jumping over the lower ones. They can be fairly difficult to avoid if you are just starting out, but generally they're not too hard to get past. Next we get to this short ladder section with a few enemies that fire some shots in a spread out pattern. I tend to just shoot the ones that are in the way, but if you've taken a little bit of damage or need some energy for your weapons, you can farm the other ones as well. Next up, there will be the spot where a few blades fall in an arcing motion. They might seem dangerous, but you can just walk straight past them and they won't hit you. Immediately after that, 3 spring-like enemies jump towards you and damage you if you make contact with them. Generally, if you read their pattern right, you shouldn't have that much trouble with them, and they only take a single shot from your Mega Buster. Following that is a section with some enemies that move back and forth across the screen. To get past these guys, you can essentially just stand back from the ones that are in your way and shoot them a few times with your Mega Buster to clear a path. Here you can get past the whole screen without actually having to fight any of them, but if you find their patterns difficult to read, then you can always just take out a few of them before proceeding. It's a similar story on this screen of just shooting the enemies that are in your way and jumping past the rest of them. Here we encounter a few more of those swooping enemies, and I generally just like to shoot at the higher ones that spawn. Here I waited and actually shot the lower one as well, but you can just jump over that guy. It's not that difficult to just pass over him. There's also a large health orb here that you can pick up if you're low on health. I really didn't need it on this run since I'd taken minimal damage, but I decided to just grab it anyway. Here it's actually easier to go past this guy and simply fall down off the side of the screen rather than going down the ladder, as in doing so, you'll bypass the section where the ladder would drop you into, and thus can get past the next screen without having to deal with the enemy that shoots at you. After that we run into another big eye, and to get past him here, all you have to do is run straight forward. If he decides to do a small jump on his second jump like he does here, then he'll just end up hitting you. But if he does a high jump on his second jump, then you'll be able to get past him without being hit. Once you enter the last section before the Cutman fight, you'll encounter 3 of these screw-like enemies that pop up and shoot at you a few times. The first one appears on the floor of the hallway, the second one on the ceiling, and the third one on the floor again. If you've lost a lot of health and are worried about getting killed by Cutman, you can go back and forth to respawn these guys and farm them for some health. But with the super arm, it's relatively easy to beat Cutman without actually taking any damage, so I tend to just go into the fight regardless of my health. Right before you enter the boss's room, you should switch to the super arm, as that's what allows you to grab the 2 blocks that are at the front of Cutman's room and throw them at him to deal massive damage. Immediately whenever you can move, you should run forward to the first block, grab it, and throw at him before he can actually hit you. Hitting Cutman with a block stuns him for just enough time for you to run back to the other block, grab it, and jump. And once he jumps at you, all you have to do is throw the second block at him, and that's Cutman down. After you've beaten Cutman's stage, Elec Man is next in line, as Cutman's weapon, the Rolling Cutter, is effective against Elec Man. These guys here at the start can be a little bit of a hassle, but you can just take the Rolling Cutter and clear them out of the way so that you don't have to deal with them while jumping on the platforms. You do the same thing here for these 2 guys as well. Now for this section, you line up on the left side of the first electricity beam, and once the one above it has stopped outputting electricity, jump forward into it with the wall stopping your forward movement, allowing you to do another jump pretty much immediately and get up onto the next screen. You'll want to switch back to the Mega Buster here, as there's a few enemies that are easier to hit with it that you'll have to deal with. If you get up fast enough, you can shoot just the first 2 of these guys and not have to deal with the third one. But if you want to be safe about it, you can shoot him as well. It's the same thing here on the second screen where you can get past the third one without having to shoot it. But here I decided to just go ahead and shoot it to be safe anyways, because it can easily hit you and send you back down the ladder. Now up on the next screen you have a small gap to cross, and after a few seconds some invisible blocks will begin to appear in a set pattern. What I like to do to time this section is to get up onto the block that you can see pretty much as soon as you can, and then time a high jump with Mega Man's blinking animation. What I mean by that is once he's opened his eye after blinking, you can immediately hold down the A button, and it's usually timed just right to get up onto the first block that appears. Then you have to wait for a short time for the third block to appear. It will appear a little bit above and to the right of your position, and you have to jump a little bit before the one you're standing on disappears. Next you simply wait for a path to materialize, and can move forward to each block as it appears. This screen here is a pretty simple parkour section that can be intimidating due to the lethal fall, but it's actually relatively easy, and as long as you take your time you should be fine. Now here on this next screen there's going to be more of the enemies that come down and shoot you on the ladder. You really only need to shoot the first 2 that come down from the top as long as you make it up fast enough. If you want to be extra careful you can shoot the third one, but most times you should be able to make it up to the next screen without him hitting you. I go up to the right here as I find the right side is a little bit easier than the left, although it's really up to preference, so if you find that going up the left side is easier for you, then you can do that as well. Here we're going to encounter a few more electricity beams, and once the first one disengages, you can pretty much immediately jump past both of them, as long as you do it fast enough. If you're worried about not being fast enough to get past them both without getting hit, you can always stop on the ladder between them and wait out the cycle. Once you get past that, there's going to be another ladder climbing section with enemies that come down from the top of the screen. Here you just have to hold up the whole time, and then once you're at the top of the first ladder, perform a high jump to make it up to the second one, as that way pretty much guarantees that you'll make it past the screen fast enough to only need to shoot the first enemy. Once you're up in this next screen, you'll have to pick up the magnet beam, as you'll need it to beat the game. You'll need to switch to the super arm here so you can grab these blocks and throw them out of the way to access the magnet beam. I like to immediately switch to the magnet beam here, as it allows you to get past a lot of the following sections with more ease than normal. You can place a magnet beam here and jump off of it to ascend to the next screen. The magnet beam can be used here as well, so you don't have to wait for both of these electricity beams. However, if you're worried about not being able to do that fast enough, you can always just wait in between the electricity beams for their cycles to end. You can theoretically also skip a cycle in this section, but I prefer not to do it as it requires you to take a hit from one of the electricity beams. Here on this next screen, you can utilize the magnet beam to skip past the parkour section, as it's much easier to do than jumping across. This next section here is a few more electricity beams that you have to get past. You can essentially just wait here and then jump past them once the second one has disengaged. Next up, there will be a big eye in your way. If the big eye jumps high on its second jump, then it'll pass right over you. But if it decides to jump low on its second jump like it did here, you'll end up taking a hit, and it's really just up to RNG on that one. Now here in the last section before the boss, there's another ladder climb with some electricity beams in each screen. For these electricity beams, I just wait through the cycle. It's extremely difficult to skip past these with the magnet beam, so you can go ahead and switch to the rolling cutter since it's the weapon that's effective against Elec Man. It's not too difficult to beat Elec Man here without getting hit, and I pulled it off about 9 times out of 10. This time in particular I failed to do it, but I'll show a clip on screen right now of what the Elec Man fight should look like if done properly. You want to run pretty close to Elec Man and then fire your rolling cutter, and then immediately run back, which pulls the blade back to you, hitting him a second time. Finally, you want to wait for a short time like you see here, before firing a third shot. And if done right, you should be able to beat Elec Man without getting hit. Next we're going to go on to Iceman stage. As the weapon we got from Elec Man, the Thunder Beam, is effective against Iceman. You get the drill. Additionally, having obtained the Magnet Beam, a lot of the gaps in Iceman stage become negligible. At the beginning, you're faced with these segmented robots. If you shoot their top portion like you see here, they instantly die. However, it takes 3 shots to their lower section to do the same. Essentially, you want to do a small hop before the first one so that you can hit its top section. And for the other ones, you can simply perform a high jump before you get up to the section that they're on, and fire once at the peak of your jump in order to take them out. After that, you're going to want to switch to the Magnet Beam, as it can be used here to get across this section without having to deal with many enemies. Now there's a few specific timings for placing your Magnet Beam so that you can get across smoothly. You want to place the first one right before you would fall off the ledge, the second when you pass by this pillar here, the third one just after this first penguin, and the last 2 you want to place pretty much immediately before the 3rd and 5th penguins would hit you. After you've crossed that gap, there's a large health drop you can grab if you've lost any health along the way. Next you're going to drop into the section that is intended to be cleared by waiting, and then traversing up following a series of invisible blocks that appear in a certain pattern. But you can just skip past it with the Magnet Beam. It's the same case on the next screen as well, where you generally are supposed to wait and then follow the pattern of invisible blocks, but once again the Magnet Beam allows you to bypass that. Now as long as you have only used 10 total Magnet Beams throughout Iceman stage so far, you can cross the entire next section without having to stop and pick up more energy. However, if you've used any more than that, then you'll have to stop down here and pick up that energy before you can get across to the next part of the stage. Here there's an extra life pickup that you can grab if you feel like you want it, but I tend to just skip past it since Mega Man has a pretty forgiving game over system. Immediately after that, there's a few health and energy drops that you can grab to replenish any health that you've lost along the way as well. After that, we come across another big eye. Once again, as long as he does a high jump on his second jump, like he does here, then you can get past him without taking any damage. But if he does decide to do a low jump, then you'll likely just get hit. Either way, Iceman is quite easy to beat without taking damage, so you shouldn't really have to worry about your health here. Now here, right before the boss fight, there will be a few penguins that come down at you. I like to switch to the Thunder Beam right before entering the hallway, as it's the weapon that's effective against Iceman, and it's pretty easy to hit these guys with it as well. You only need to take out the first one to avoid being hit. The rest of them can be avoided by merely jumping over them. However, if you feel like you want some more health or energy for your weapons, you can shoot them all and try to get some item drops. Going into Iceman, you'll want to jump and shoot with the Thunder Beam as soon as you take control of Mega Man, and from there on you can pretty much just spam the beat button to continue firing, and after just one cycle of his shots, you should have already taken him out. You can then just jump between his second and third projectile to dodge out of the way and end the stage. The next step in the boss order following Iceman is Fireman, and surprise surprise, it's because the Ice Slasher is effective against him. At the beginning of Fireman stage, there are some screws that will shoot a few shots at you each. You can just sit at the top of the ladders here and shoot the ones that are in front of you without having to worry about getting hit by them. For this one here, you can stop after his first shot and then simply walk past him before his second one. After that is the section where you have a flame bar that you must wait on before climbing up this ladder while a few enemies rain down from the top of the screen in a somewhat random pattern. As long as the patterns are favorable, you can fairly easily get past them without getting hit, but you may need to stop for just a second and let them fall past you if they have a difficult pattern. Once you make it up to the next screen, there's just going to be a few more ladders to climb. The fire bars and health drops should really just be avoided, as you'll most likely end up losing health rather than gaining any back if you go for them. If you do find that you are low on health here, don't worry, as just past this section there will be more health drops that aren't blocked by any obstacles. Once you're up on the next screen, you'll want to go ahead and switch to the magnet beam, as it allows you to jump past these fire bars and bypass the electricity beams on the normal route, which can be really annoying and difficult to get past without taking damage. Once you're past these last fire bars, you can hold to the left as you fall and pick up some of these health drops if you need them. Now after falling into the next screen, there are 2 more fire bars that you need to wait on. I end up getting hit, but it's not that much of a problem. The next screen is kind of the same story with some more fire bars. Here I like to use the magnet beam to just skip past this section, and as long as you time it right and get forgiving patterns, you can avoid a lot of the enemies that rain down. Up in this next screen, you need to use the magnet beam to avoid this fire, as you can't run under it without taking damage. Here I use a few magnet beams to try and get past this enemy quicker, but I kind of mess it up. You can just wait for him to pass over you instead of doing what I tried, as that's much easier and more reliable. You can use the magnet beam to get past these guys without them hitting you. However, if you find that to be difficult, you can switch to either the rolling cutter or thunder beam and just shoot them. Once you're past this section, you can go ahead and switch to the ice slasher, as it's both effective against fireman and can be used to freeze the fire bars at the front of the entrance to the hallway before his fight. You'll want to fire the ice slasher when half of this raised platform gets exposed on screen, as that will provide the correct timing to where you don't have to wait on the fire bars to thaw before getting past them. When you do enter the pre-boss hallway, there's going to be 4 screw enemies hanging from the top of the hallway, but you can just jump and freeze them with the ice slasher and you really don't have to worry about them at all. Fireman himself is relatively easy, however his fight does require you to take a few hits if you don't do an advanced strategy, which I won't be going over in this video, as I myself haven't learned it yet, and it's much easier to just take a little bit of damage for an easy fight. Essentially, you'll want to stand in the corner and fire your ice slasher until he first hits you, after which you'll keep firing and start running towards him until he hits you again, when you'll stop running and continue firing. If you do that correctly, you should be able to beat Fireman while only taking 2 hits. After Fireman, you're on to the last of the Robot Master stages, which is obviously going to be Bomb Man, as we've already gone through all of the other stages. At the start of the stage, there's going to be a few springs that are going to jump up towards you. I recommend just playing this part slow at first and shooting the springs as they come, but overall they're not that difficult to deal with. Once you get past that section, you should switch to the magnet beam, as it allows you to skip past a lot of the following sections without really having to deal with them. When you reach this area with some intermittent gaps, there's going to be a few bombs that shoot up from the gaps and detonate in the air. You can just wait here under the first bomb and then use the magnet beam to jump past it, and continue to use the magnet beam to bypass the rest of the bombs. After that, there's a section with a few of the screw enemies from the previous stages. You can just jump over them on the platforms above them, and as long as you time it fairly well, you should be able to get past them without taking too much damage. However, if you find it difficult to jump past them like that, you could also just go down and shoot them instead. Moving on up to the next section, there's a short ladder climb with some enemies that are going to shoot at you a few times each. To avoid their shots, you can simply hold up on the ladder the whole way, making sure to buffer a brief stop in your climbing, as this allows you to have the correct position to get past these enemies without taking a hit. You can drop down the second ladder and pick up the large health orb that's there as well if you need it. Once you get up into the next screen, there's going to be a rather annoying enemy known as a Sniper Joe that will jump onto the screen once you begin to scroll it. So I recommend to just switch to the ice slasher here and freeze the Joe in place so that it can't jump after you, and then just jump over it and move on to the next section. Once you've scrolled past the Joe, you can go ahead and switch back to the magnet beam, as you can use it to get past this next section with relative ease, and your magnet beam should take you all the way up to this next screen. Moving on, you can either just climb up this ladder and jump across the 2 blocks that are there, or use the magnet beam to get past it a little quicker. Either way works, and that screen is relatively easy. Now up here we encounter this enemy that shoots a spread out array of projectiles like we saw towards the end of Cutman's stage. I recommend switching to the ice slasher here and simply freezing it, as it can be very easy to be knocked off the platforms in this section and into the spikes, which would instantly kill you. Once you've frozen it, you can switch back to the magnet beam and use it to get up to the top of this ledge here. Or alternatively, you could simply walk across the ground and climb the ladder when you reach it. You can pick up an extra life if you feel like doing so while you're up here. You do have to take out a Sniper Joe to get to it, but if that's worth it to you, then of course you can go ahead and do that. Before this last section, you're going to want to go ahead and switch to the Firestorm, since it's what we'll be using against Bomb Man. I just damage boost through this Joe, although if you don't want to take damage or if you're low on health, you can either freeze it with the Ice Slasher and jump over it, or just take him out with one of your several weapons. Once you get into the section before the Bomb Man fight, you can simply walk off the ledge here and hold right, as you'll fall down the whole way. There is a chance that one of the enemies on the second screen will hit you, and it's really just up to RNG. The Bomb Man fight itself is relatively easy, and all you have to do is make sure that you stay really close to Bomb Man, as this will cause him to keep jumping away from your position, and as long as you keep firing with the Firestorm, you'll take him down in quite a short time. After we've beaten all the Robot Masters, we enter into the second half of the game, in which we have to go through 4 final stages known as the Wily stages, each with their own boss. Starting off at the beginning of Wily 1, I recommend immediately switching to the Ice Slasher, as this allows you to freeze the big eyes in the air and walk under them. You can do this by jumping immediately whenever you see them at the edge of your screen, and firing a shot with the Ice Slasher. This will freeze them in place, and if timed right you'll be able to make it under them, even if they do a small jump. If you find the timing for that to be hard however, you can instead freeze them and switch to another weapon to take them out. For this specific big eye, you can get away with not freezing him, however that requires a somewhat in-depth understanding of the patterns, and I actually just recommend freezing him with the Ice Slasher. Once you're past the big eyes, you'll want to switch to the Thunder Beam, as this can easily get rid of the blocks in your way, and you're going to need it anyways for one of the screens coming up. It can be kind of difficult to time the jumps to get past these fire bars here, and if you do have trouble with that, you can use the Ice Slasher to freeze them, making this section much easier. Here you simply climb this ladder and walk off to land on the platform across the spikes. Additionally, you can attempt to jump up and grab the large health orb. It is a little hard to time the jump, but it's definitely possible and worth trying if you're low on health. Going up into the next screen, there are a few springs that jump at you, and depending on their pattern, they might be positioned to land directly on top of you. If they are, you can just fire a shot with the Thunder Beam, as it shoots in 3 directions at once and will take out all of the spring enemies. After that, you just need to fire a few more shots to take out the blocks that are in your way. There's another large health orb that you can navigate up to using the Magnet Beam, if you need some more health or failed to grab the one in the previous room. In the next screen, you have a small section to navigate with a few spikes and small platforms, while one of the missile enemies goes across the screen and tries to knock you off. To avoid falling into the spikes, you can shoot the missile guy and then immediately jump to the next platform. Before moving on to the next screen, I recommend switching to the Magnet Beam, as you're going to want to use it to skip past the following section. You can do that by holding the Magnet Beam to produce a long beam, and then jumping past these guys while doing your best to avoid their shots and not venture too close to the spikes. If you're running low on energy for the Magnet Beam, there is some on the ground past the spikes, and I recommend grabbing it since the next screen actually requires the use of the Magnet Beam to navigate. It can be difficult to get up here with the Magnet Beam, and if you end up running out of energy, you can go back down through the hole in the ground and grab the 2 energy pickups at the bottom of the ladder. And since unloading and reloading screens respawns pickups, you can repeatedly go up and down the ladder to refill your energy as needed. When you do get past the screen, you're going to want to switch immediately to the Thunder Beam, and prepare for what is no doubt the hardest boss in the entire game. Now I'm not going to cover the entire strategy of how to go about beating the Yellow Devil here, but I do have a video on my channel that is a complete guide to the fight, and I'll link to that in the description, so if you find yourself struggling with this boss, you can check that video out. A highly paraphrased version of the strategy is as follows. You want to keep your jumps very low while his projectiles come at you, jumping towards the projectiles whenever you're dodging them, and moving back towards them once you've passed over them to try and give yourself some more room to dodge the next ones. Overall, the Yellow Devil is an extremely difficult boss to get past, and once again if you're struggling, I recommend you check out the guide which I've linked to in the description. Anyhow, once you've gotten past the Yellow Devil, you're going to go on to the second Wily stage. I find Wily 2 to be a little bit more difficult than Wily 1 in terms of platforming. However, the boss at the end is much easier than the Yellow Devil. First off, you're going to have to traverse across a platform riddled with gaps and some swooping enemies. I find it's best to wait for the ones at the beginning and shoot them once they come in to hit you. I also recommend that if you're a new player that you wait for the rest of these enemies too, as they can easily knock you into the void. I jump over a lot of them here as it's kind of just a speedrunning habit that I've picked up over playing the game for a while, but it can be difficult to execute. If you're having trouble with these guys, I recommend spawning one of them by scrolling the screen just a bit, waiting for it to come to you, and then shooting it whenever it dives in to attack you. Once you get past this section, you're going to have to refight Cut Man. You can just use the Mega Buster for this, and I usually just mash the B button while attempting to dodge each of his attacks, and it can also help to keep your distance from him. Once you've made it past Cut Man, there's going to be a few of the screw enemies from previous stages. Here I do a technique where I jump twice in order to skip over them, but that can be a somewhat difficult strategy to time, and you can just wait for them or even use the Thunder Beam which shoots downwards to take them out. That can be a useful way to deal with the first one of the screws, as in doing so you get access to the health pickup next to it. Before moving on to the next section, you're going to want to switch to the Rolling Cutter, as you're going to have to refight Elec Man next. I accidentally switched to the Thunder Beam at first, but you can see I fixed that here before the fight starts. I end up taking a hit, which does leave me with quite low health, but overall it's generally an easy fight, as Elec Man is one of the easier bosses. The next section after the Elec Man refight has a few of the bombs that we saw in Bomb Man stage, as well as some gaps in the platform you're on. You can just wait each one out and then jump over the gaps after it has exploded. You'll want to remain cautious not to fall into any of the gaps here, as if you die before getting to the next section, you'll be sent all the way back to the beginning of Wily 2. In the next screen, you'll come across some of the enemies that move across the screen like we've seen in a few of the previous stages. Here I like to switch to the Thunder Beam since it fires tri-directionally, allowing us to easily get past this section. There are a few pickups scattered throughout this part of the stage, such as energy and an extra life, but it's really up to your preference whether or not you want to grab them. Finally, past this ladder is going to be the boss of the stage, the Copy Robot, and you're going to want to switch to the Firestorm for this fight. A lot of people tend to struggle with the Copy Robot, as it can have somewhat difficult patterns to dodge, and does a lot more damage to you than you do to it. However, if you time it right by jumping and then hitting it with the Firestorm as soon as its invincibility frames are over, you can keep it stun locked for the whole fight and take minimal damage. This strategy can be a little bit difficult to time at first, but you can pick it up pretty fast, and it makes the fight go from being one of the hardest to one of the easiest. Once you've beaten the Copy Robot, you're going to move on to what I think is the easiest of the 4 Wily stages, Wily 3. The first few rooms of the stage see you having to deal with some slider and screw enemies. You can either just attempt to dodge them and run through the segment like I do here, or if you'd prefer, you can use one of your several weapons to take these guys out and save a little bit of health. The next part is a section that speeds you up and has a few enemies that spawn from the right side of the screen. The first enemies are going to be the penguins that we encountered in Iceman stage. You can either shoot them or jump over them here, but I decided to shoot them because they can give a few health or energy drops. After that, there's going to be the missile enemies from a few of the previous stages. You're going to want to jump over these guys, as if you do shoot them, you'll be hit by their explosion. There's going to be 10 of them that you can jump over with a very short jump, and once you're at the edge of this raised platform, you'll want to perform a high jump in order to bait the final missile enemy into spawning high up, so that you can enter into the boss room without being hit. This boss is relatively easy, and you can essentially just stand on top of these blocks and shoot the first 3 of them rapidly with the Mega Buster. Once you've taken out 3 of them, you're going to want to switch to the Super Arm so that you can grab these blocks to take out the last 4, as they only take 1 hit each this way. After beating the Bubble Robots, we move on to the final stage of the game, Wily 4. The platforming itself in this stage isn't too bad, but having to do 4 different boss refights and then the Wily fight at the end can be quite difficult. First off, there's a short platforming section with spikes on either side of you, and some of the enemies that come down from the top of the screen and shoot at you. If you make it up to the ladder fast enough, then you can get away with not actually having to fight these enemies. But that requires you to nearly perfectly ascend up the platforms to the top of the screen, so it's much easier to simply take the top 3 guys out. The next screen is just a simple ladder climb with a few more of the enemies from the previous room, and once again you just need to shoot the guys that come from the top of your screen. Here you can either move these blocks out of the way with the Thunder Beam or Super Arm, or you can use the Magnet Beam and go over them. You can avoid the shots of these screws much better than I did here by shooting them with the Thunder Beam, or timing your movement correctly, but I wanted to conserve the Thunder Beam's ammo for the Wily fight, and kind of messed up my movement, so I ended up taking some damage. Once you're past that section, there's a moving platform that you're meant to ride across to get past this gap here, but you can skip over it by using 2 Magnet Beams. If you do feel like getting the extra life or Yashichi, you can go down to the section below, but I tend to just skip over it and go straight to the boss refights. The first boss that you're going to have to refight is Bomb Man, so it's best to go ahead and switch to the Firestorm before entering the teleporter. The strategy for Bomb Man is the same as it was during his stage, where you just want to stay close to him and keep hitting him with the Firestorm. Once you've beaten Bomb Man, you should switch to the Ice Slasher, as Fireman is the next boss you have to take out. It's better here to perform the strategy in which you don't have to get hit, but once again I'm not really familiar with the strategy itself, so I just use the same one that I used in Fireman stage. If I do happen to cover the damage list strategy at some point in the future, then I'll go ahead and link it in the description. After you've beaten Fireman, you'll want to switch to the Thunder Beam, since the next refight is going to be Iceman. To avoid getting hit by Iceman, you should jump immediately out of the teleporter and fire 3 shots at him, immediately running back towards the teleporter once you have fired your 3rd shot. The last boss you have to refight is Gutsman, and you can either use the Mega Buster or Hyper Bomb to take him out depending on your preference here. Once you've refought all 4 of these bosses, the final thing standing between you and the end credits is Wily himself. I recommend switching to the Firestorm here, as it's the optimal weapon to start the Wily fight with. The Wily fight itself has 2 phases, one in which you utilize the Firestorm shield to rapidly damage Wily's ship, and one after the glass is broken where you use the Thunder Beam. The first phase is relatively short, and you simply mash the B button and repeatedly jump into the ship to hit it with the Firestorm shield. The second phase is a little bit longer, and you generally want to jump and fire once at Wily's ship with the Thunder Beam before running close under it to dodge its projectile. Be careful not to get too close to Wily's ship, as this will cause you to take a lot of damage. But you also need to make sure not to stray too far away from it either, as if you do, then the projectile it fires out will hit you. If you do run out of ammo with the Thunder Beam, the next best weapon you can use is the Rolling Cutter, and I actually ended up having to switch to it in this run. But once you've taken Dr. Wily out, you'll have beaten the first Mega Man game, and can vibe out to the end credits as you revel in your victory. If you made it here to the end of the video, I'd like to take a second to thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, feel free to leave a like on the video and share it with whoever you think might be interested. If you want to stay up to date on content like this, perhaps consider subscribing. And if there's anything else you'd like me to cover, leave a comment and I'll look into it. But once again, thanks for watching.